Mongol Empire. After Genghis Khan from Ogedei to Mongke. August 1227. Death of Genghis. Genghis Khan's death would mark a pivotal moment in the history of the Mongol Empire. Genghis Khan had been one of the greatest conquerors in world history, and the Mongol Empire he helped create was at a point one of the largest contiguous land empires in history. He was the oldest child of Yesugei, who had been a chieftain of the Borgian clan, and his wife Hoilun. On the death of Yesugei in suspicious circumstances, he and his family would be abandoned by the tribe. During this time, Temujin would become more accomplished in horse riding and archery, these traits being valued in the nomadic society. He would also grow a following. In the future, Temujin would meet two other key individuals, Jamaka and Togrul, who would play a part in his journey. Life under the Mongol Empire would be complex, made up of several factors and attributes, and decidedly affected and impacted by the growing diversity of the populations within the extensive territory. Mongolians would bring to front their identity, and history of traditions, into the lands they would come to conquer. Throughout the length of the empire, they would come in contact and interact with several different peoples, including the Chinese, Persians, Russians, and Arabs. Every interaction leading to massive impacts in the local population. All of them would be distinct in their own way, having unique cultures and ways of life. The Mongols would tend to adopt parts and pieces of the local cultures and administrative systems, but kept their laws and traditions. The society was therefore made to be adaptable and able to assimilate different attributes. This would result in it being an extremely dynamic society. This and other facts would result in the prospering of several regions. The period would be known as the Pax Mongolica, and would usher several changes and developments. Genghis would die at an unfortunate time, which would force news of his death to be repressed. His death came during a siege on Zhongxing. A month or so after his death, Zhongxing would fall. The cause of his death has been contested. Multiple ideas and theories exist as to what it could be attributed to. Even though his death marked a transition for the empire he had ushered into existence, and had defined for years whilst he was alive, it also came to mark the end of an era. He would be carried back to Mongolia, where he would be buried, but his legacy would go on for centuries and decades after forming the backbone of an empire that would come to outlast him, and give birth to several impactful Khans who would achieve their own successes. In that period, the borders of the Mongol Empire would swell to great lengths. They would encompass regions in vast corners of the world. Succession struggles and challenges would arise in the wake of the Temujin's death, but his legacy would remain, including the administrative changes he had made, the support he had given to the arts and sciences, as well as the cultural exchanges. Things had changed forever. Would they ever return to what it had been? He had died, leaving an extensive Mongolian empire. We will start the story of today with his son. His son, Ogedei, who was third amongst his sons, was chosen. The other sons were Joshi, Chagatai, and Tolui. There were probably others of his issue. Ogedei was the son of Genghis with Bort. He would be born into a lineage that would rule the Mongol Empire, under which the Mongol Empire would steadily expand beyond its own borders, and add more and more people. Prior to his ascension, he would be heavily involved in the Mongol invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire, an episode that would be filled with many events and stories. He would enjoy a good reputation as a military leader. His contributions to his father's rise could be seen as substantial enough to warrant praise. He would independently campaign against the Jin with his father as Khan. 1229. Ogedei is formally elected at a Kurultai. Kurultais were meetings where at times new Khans were chosen. There were also a place to make decisions that would affect the whole tribe, especially issues to do with military decisions. Ogedei, Mongke, Genghis and other Khans would be chosen at these events, but they were not always serious. The period around 1229 would also see several nations in Kipchak-controlled steppes taken over by the Mongols. Amongst the people inhabiting in that area at the time are the Bashkirs and the Bulgars. The Bashkirs are native to Russia, but there are communities in other nations. They have a rich history. 1230. Campaign against the Jin dynasty continues. It had started around 1211. With the ascension of Ogedei to power, the campaign continued. The years would be characterized by several battles. 1231 would see the Battle of Dowigu. Fighting in these campaigns was often fierce, and the Jin dynasty's end would be marked in 1234. 1232. Siege of Kaifeng. Two armies had been sent by Ogedei, and he and his brother Tolui would lead the armies. The walls of Kaifeng would see the arrival of the Mongols in April. The siege that would occur would be particularly hard on the occupants of the capital city of the Jurchen-led Jin Empire. Some peace treaties were attempted but ultimately failed. Emperor Aizong of Jin would escape from the city and the city would fall to the Mongols. 1234. Collapse of the Jin dynasty, capturing of Keizu. When the Emperor Aizong of Jin had fled from the falling Kaifeng, he would go towards Aizu, arriving in August. The city would eventually fall following the arrival of the Mongols in December. Briefly, the emperorship was held by a general, after the emperor abdicates the throne shortly before his death. The emperorship is ultimately a short one. The period would also be characterized by several Han Chinese and Khitans joining the Mongols to fight alongside them. Amongst them were individuals like Shitians. The general period would see the formation of the newly submitted army or newly adhered army, which consisted of individuals who were previously part of the Song. They would go on to play a role in Mongol affairs. The time would also see Jalal al-Din Mangbunai destroyed by Chormakan, a general who was under Ogedei, and saw Mongol activity in Goryeo, Korea. Jalal al-Din Mangbunai was one of the last Khwarezmian monarchs. His father was Ala ad-Din Muhammad. Jalal al-Din Mangbunai would prove himself a capable military leader, seeing victory against the Mongols at the Battle of Parwan. But he would eventually be chased away. Chormakan, on the other hand, would be a general under Genghis and also under his son Ogedei. Ogedei would be the one to task him with the Mongolian conquest of Persia. He would achieve several feats throughout his life, receiving many submissions on behalf of the empire. 1235. Karakorum becomes Mongol Empire capital. Ogedei would have buildings built within the city, one of them called the Tumanum Garlan Ord. The city would see several events occur within it, serving as an important center for politics. Several important guests would be received within its walls, and they would be able to impact and change the future of the Great Mongol Empire as well as the history of the nations they often represented. 1237. At this point in time, the Mongols approach Ryazan, and capture it. It is subsequently destroyed. Battle of Sit River sees the death of Yuri II of Vladimir. An important battle that would see the involvement of several individuals, amongst them are Burundai, and forces under him, as well as Yuri II of Vladimir, who is child of Vsevolod III Yuryevich. He would have been involved in the Vladimir-Suzdal War of Succession after the death of his father Grand Prince Vsevolod. Yuri is involved in some conflicts throughout his life, some of them against the Bulgarians. 1238. Eventual destruction of Magaz, which is capital of Alonia, after it is captured. Batu Khan is involved. Batu is the son of Joshi, grandson of Genghis Khan, and Khan of the Golden Horde. He would be tasked with conquering Western territory by Ogedei. 1239. Some territory is recaptured by the Song army after it had been previously captured by the Mongols. 1240. would mark an important part in the history of Kievan Rus. By this year Kievan Rus has fallen to the expanding and effective Mongols almost in its entirety. A few cities remain, however. The period also sees conflicts between individuals within Ogedei's relations, included amongst them are Guyuk, Buri, and Batu. Mongol invasions of India. Several events would also occur during this time concerning India, which would be an important region. One that would see events like the invasion of Kashmir in 1235 and several interactions between the Mongols and people from the Indian region. 1241 would see the invasion of the Indus Valley by the Mongols and a siege of Lahore. Salih, who was a Mongol general, would also be involved in issues within the region. Other events would also occur within India, like the rise of Prince Jalal ad-Din Masood. 1241. Mongol army overcome forces allied against them in the form of the Hungarians, the Knights Templar, and the Croatians. Death of Ogedei occurs sometime here, and the invasion in Europe is paused. In 1242 Western Mongol army and Batu leaves Central Europe. Torigene would rule after the death of her husband, placing allies in positions, and making changes and developments in several areas including education. She garners support for her son Guyuk. Guyuk is the oldest son of Ogedei. During Ogedei's reign, he would be involved in several invasions and conquests. He is born in 1206, so that when the death of Ogedei occurs he is in his mid-30s. His mother is Torigene. He eventually marries Oghul Kamish, who originated from the Merkits. He would be involved in the siege of Rizan and of Magaz. At some point in time, the youngest brother of Genghis Khan, Temujin, makes a move for power and the throne, and Guyuk is pressured into making a move. In 1246, a Kurultai occurs. Guyuk is elected as Great Khan in a ceremony that is attended widely. He makes several changes of his own, which include a change in personnel. Several individuals are replaced. He takes up military campaigns, including those in Korea, Iraq, and South China. Some of these conflicts have a large impact for the Mongol Empire as well as the regions and nations involved. Guyuk also divides territory. Under Guyuk, Yesu Mongke is made Khan of Chagatai Shanate, taking the place of Kara Halegyu. Under Guyuk as well, conflicts with the Nizari Ismailis and the Abbasids are also seen. The Mongol invasions of Korea. These start around 1231, and are very impactful within the area, ushering in many changes and leading to massive casualties. Several interactions would occur between the Mongols and Goryeo, including delegations that are sent between them with messages. Conflicts would occur in 1231, characterized by events like the capture of several cities. Goryeo would eventually surrender. Other events occur like the siege of Kuju. The siege would occur sometime from 1231 to 1232. It sees the involvement of several individuals, and sees a victory on the Goryeo side. The event would also involve the use of siege weaponry, and would be characterized by the use of different tactics and approaches by the Mongols, which includes the use of catapults. The Mongol Empire would outnumber the Goryeo army. 1248 would see Guyuk's eventual death. This was after he set out on a march into the west from Karakorum, and dies on his way. Several theories exist as to events surrounding his death, from ideas of invasion, to ideas that he had been going to confront a rival. Once again, a Khan's wife would step in as regent. This time however things were different. It was Oghul Kamish, but she faces several challenges including her own competency. 1250. Kurultai called by Batu. Some Ogiad and Chagatai families aren't in attendance for this Kurultai, which offers Batu the title, who declines, preferring Mongke to take it. Mongke had been born in 1209, son of Tolui and Sorgatani Beki. He would be involved in the conflict with the Jin dynasty. Mongke would in time be sent on tasks by Ogedei, some of which he'd prove successful in. He would be involved in conflicts in the Caucasus, and he would also be involved in several other events like the Siege of Kiev, which occurred in 1240, and the significant and impactful Battle of Mohi. 1251. Second Kurultai. Several individuals are suspected of plotting against Mongke and are punished when Shayaman, a grandson of Ogedei, seeks the throne, maneuvering troops towards Mongke's palace. Mongke is warned. Mongke's ascension to the throne marks a shift in power from one line of Genghis Khan's descendants to another. After his ascension to the throne, Mongke would make several moves to better consolidate his power amidst challenges. Some of the most prominent ones would come in the form of Shayaman and the Ogedei faction. His reign would be marked by several changes, amongst which would be projects constructed. Economic changes would also characterize his reign, added to which would be changes in the treatment of civilians. Mongke also made changes concerning taxing within the empire. 1252 saw a census ordered by Mongke. It ends around 1259. Under Mongke, China was to be ruled by Kublai, while another brother of Mongke, Hulagu, is to rule Persia. Hulagu would meet with success in some of his exploits. He was the brother of Arikboke, Mongke Khan, and Kublai. He would play large roles in Mongol activities in Baghdad and in Damascus, and under him the Ilkhanate would come into existence. He would be born in 1217, son to Tolui and Sorghantani Biji. In his exploits he'd come across the Lurs, the Nizari Ismaili, the Abbasid Caliphate, amongst others who he would be involved in conflicts with. An episode that he would be involved in would be the Siege of Baghdad. When Mongke had sent him, he would send him with an extremely large army. The army would be made of people that represented different faiths and different backgrounds. 1258 would see the surrender of the city of Baghdad. 1260 would see the conquest of Syria, which was aided by several vassals of the Mongols. Hulagu would return to Mongolia after the conflicts, leaving some men behind. In his absence, the Battle of Ain Jalut would be fought, which would see fierce conflicts between the Mongols and Sultan Qutuz and his troops. The Mongol troops would eventually be defeated, as they would enter into an ambush. Hulagu would eventually at some point in time find himself forced into a civil war against a brother of Batu Khan called Berk. Kublai Khan was born in 1215, fourth son of Tolui. He would be involved in many conquests. When his brother became Khan, he would find himself viceroy of northern China, a role that he would achieve many feats in, including improvements in certain aspects of governance, which would grant him favor with several people. At some point he would be tasked with attacking Yunnan, and it was during this episode that Duan Xingzhi, the last king of Dali, would change sides and ally himself with the Mongols, becoming a Tusi. Back to the story of Mongke. Plans against the Song dynasty were to continue, with the aid of troops under Kublai. The finances of the empire would be improved under Mongke's rule, and at some point in time, Hulagu would be tasked with military and civil affairs in Persia. 1253 would see the Dali kingdom conquered and the surrender of Duan Xingzhi, who would become a local ruler. Kublai had been put in charge for invading Dali by his brother Mongke. His army would be able to cross the Jinsha in 1253. Kurultai held in 1253. One event that would involve intense fighting between battling forces is when Ismaili fortresses start being attacked by Kipka. He is a Mongol general. 1256. Surrendering of Rukn al-Din Kasha. 1258. War against Dai Viet kingdom ruled by the Tran dynasty. It would see the likes of Uriankadai involved in the conflicts. Kurultai held in 1258. 1258. Siege of Baghdad, center of Islamic Empire at the time. Period also saw capture of other regions, and the expansion of Mongol territory. 1259. Mongke dies. 1285. Another attempt at invasion of the Dai Viet kingdom. 1287. Another attempt at invasion of the Dai Viet kingdom. Under Ogedei we'd see massive expansion in the west, into Europe and in the east in the direction of Korea, though he would meet challenges during his time. We will end the first part of this podcast series here. In the next part we will explore Ogedei's reign, and look into the stories of some individuals who would have a large impact on the Mongol Empire. Thank you for listening. If you liked the episode, please take the time to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more topics and episodes. Second part. In the last episode we looked at the events that would occur after the death of Genghis, including the several episodes that characterized that period. We will continue. The expansion under Ogedei would be some of the greatest history had ever seen and might ever see. Like some leaders before, Ogedei would be a leader skilled with the ability to adequately rely on the individuals that surrounded him, which gave him added strength. Amongst some of the individuals would be individuals like Subutai. Subutai would be a general who would be involved in activities under both Genghis and under Ogedei. His feats and successes would be extensive. A characteristic that he would do well in would be strategizing. His rise in the ranks, and the reliance on him to lead and control were things that would represent some of the great attributes the Mongol Empire had. He would be quite young when he would be thrust into the middle of great responsibilities. A trusted individual of Genghis and one that he would come to rely on greatly. His tactics on the battlefield would be known to cause panic and confusion in his enemies, and this would come into great showing against enemies even when they had clear advantages, like when facing the Jin. Great thought would also be placed into individual actions when facing enemies. Some of the battles he would be eventually known for would include battles like the Battle of the Kalka River in 1223, and the Battle of Mohi. At times, Subutai would also use his cunning and intelligence to effect. Other battles would see him greatly outnumbered but still weather overwhelming odds. Like the battle against Muhammad II of the Khwarezmian Empire along the Urs River. Subutai would also be involved in the invasions of Jin China, being involved in several events and missions like the Great Raid in Shandong, and the campaign against the Tanguts. Under Ogedei he'd once again be involved in the conflict with the Jin Empire, during which he would use more complex, well-thought-out strategies, and intelligence to work out important wins that furthered the expanse of the growing Mongol Empire. The campaign would see battles like the Battle of Sanfengshan, the Battle of Yuling. Subutai would also be involved in events at Kaifeng. Subutai would further be involved in the conquest of Rus. In the invasion of Central Europe, one attribute that would be of note would be Subutai's ability to gain knowledge on the terrain and characteristics of the territory he was facing. Significant battles during this time would include the Battle of Mohi 1241, where he'd be able to change where the Hungarians were focusing on, in order to achieve his overall aim. The battle would also see the use of catapults, secret movements, and use of the army in different places at the same time. Gunpowder weapons would also make their appearance in the fighting. The conflict against Hungary would also be significant for the conflict between Batu and Guyuk. Mongol activities in Hungary would have a massive effect on several aspects of life there. Subutai's son Uriankardai would also serve the Mongol Empire. Whilst in Western Asia, extensive activities would occur in Persia, and in the region of Mesopotamia. Jub would be another individual, who would gain military acclaim under the Mongol Empire. His story would be one of interest, rising to high heights but having started as an enemy soldier, a testament to the Khan's ability to rely on the skill and ability of those around him, and to use the attributes of these people. He would be involved in the 1211 Jin invasion, occupying an important role. During his time, he'd often fight alongside Subutai. He'd be involved in a battle with Kuchlug, defeating Kuchlug several times. He'd prove his loyalty to the Khan several times as well. In the invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire, he'd be able to face a large army, and hold his own, eventually being dispatched by the Khan to give pursuit to the fleeing Shah. Makali was yet another individual, who would prove himself several times. He was son of a Jalaiah leader, and he would serve as Viceroy of China at one point in time. A capable leader, whose uncle and fathers had given allegiance to Genghis. He'd serve the Khan in several capacities before ultimately rising to the role of being someone that the Khan could rely on, a role that he would often be rewarded for in different ways, for example being given command of territories. His life would see him involved in several battles including the Battle of Yuling. 1217 saw him attack Jin-controlled territory. His death would come in 1223, however his descendants would come to play several roles in the empire. Yet another impactful individual in the Mongol Empire would be Nogai. Nogai would be known within the Golden Horde, a general, and an important figure in its ranks, having massive influence in Europe, while the Mongols were in the region. He'd be a great-grandson of Joshi, and well known to Berke Khan. He'd take part in the Mongol raid against Poland, and increasingly take up more responsibility as time went. At times he'd be given several troops to lead. He'd further be involved in conflicts in Sandomierz, Krakow and in other cities. In the civil war between the Golden Horde and the Ilkhanate, he'd take charge of troops, and become involved in several raids. Passing through several regions and areas. He'd have to face Hulegu and Shiraman in these conflicts. The conflicts would see massive fights and clashes between large armies, but Nogai would often emerge victorious from battles that he'd come across. After Kublai Khan's reign as Great Khan began, Nogai would be active in several conflicts across Persia. 1266 would see interactions between him and the Emperor Michael VIII Palaiologos, and an alliance form between the Emperor and the Golden Horde. The previous year having seen an army of the Mongols cross the Danube, and eventually encounter Byzantine forces on the battlefield. Nogai would further have extensive power and influence under Mengu Timur Khan, having some good amount of sway over the Ruthenians, the Ossetians, and several other people. Nogai would also be involved in the invasion of Hungary in 1285. A relatively weaker Hungary, however he would meet several challenges during the conflicts. The conflicts would also see the involvement of Ladislaus IV of Hungary, and would lead to many casualties for the Mongols. Political changes in 1287 would see Talabuga rise to the Khan of the Golden Horde, and subsequently led to conflicts against the Ilkhanate, some of which would see attempts at capturing territory, attempts which wouldn't be successful. Nogai and Tabaluga would also be involved in conflicts in Circassia. However, his relationship with Tabaluga would deteriorate, leading ultimately to the death of Talabuga, and the rise of a new Khan of the Golden Horde in the form of Tokhta, for which Nogai would be rewarded for his part in. But his relationship with the new Khan would not be without its own issues, and eventually the Battle of Nergi Plains would come about, which would see some extremely fierce fighting between the forces of Nogai and Tokhta. At the end of this battle, Tokhta would be the defeated party. At the Battle of Kagamlik, Tokhta would return once again and face Nogai in another conflict, but in this battle he'd emerge victorious. Nogai would perish. Yet another individual of repute would be Bayan of the Barin. He would be a general who would fight under the Mongols, gaining success in several important and critical battles. His family had had a history of serving the Mongols, and he would be placed as commander of the Yuan army at some point by Kublai. He'd also take part in several events and missions for the Mongols. For one, he'd be involved in the conquest of southern China, taking several cities, and defeating several of the Song generals. During the campaign, the Mongols would win a massive victory on the Yangtze. The conflicts would also see the involvement of Jia Sidao. At the time, She Doking was the Grand Empress Dowager, and she acted as regent. She had been married to Emperor Lizong of Song, who had died in 1264, having reigned from 1224. During his reign, he would delegate a lot of issues of governance to those around him. He would oversee part of the conflicts of the Song Empire with the Mongols and would oversee several events. Jia Sidao, on the other hand, would be born in 1213. His sister would be a concubine of the Emperor Lizong, and he would act as chancellor in the Song dynasty. Some of the policies he would undertake would be unpopular amongst certain people. He died in 1275, but prior to that he had been punished as a result of some of his failures. Kublai at some point in time in the conflicts with the Song would send several emissaries who would be killed. Bayan would do the same, dispatching some emissaries to the Song court, but they would meet a similar fate, after which the Mongols would attack, leading to the fall of several areas and the defeat of several generals. Taizhou would fall to the Mongols, and some Song officials would appeal to Bayan with no success. Linon would eventually fall into the hands of Bayan in 1276, and surrender would be forced from the Song dynasty. These weren't the only people who gained acclaim under the Mongol Empire. Several events would also be significant during this period in the Mongol Empire, battles that were fought and won, and battles that would be noted in history for the events that had occurred at them, the strategies that were used, and the generals and individuals who were present. One significant battle would be the Battle of Mohi. Battle of Mohi. 1241 would see the important and critical Battle of Mohi take place. In it, individuals like Batu Khan, Shibon, Berke, and Subutai would make an impact on the Mongol side. On the other side would be individuals like Sbella IV of Hungary, and Matthias Ratot. Severe fighting between the troops would occur over the period of the conflicts, and the Mongol Empire would emerge with the victory from the major conflicts. The period prior to the conflicts would have seen Mongol conflicts with other armies and individuals like the army of Duke Henry II the Pious of Silesia, which had occurred at Legnica, the battle against the Transylvanian armies, and the conflicts against Denis Tomai and his forces. Structures and barriers would be prepared in preparation for the Mongol advance, though this ultimately would be countered effectively by the Mongol forces, who once again showed their ability to react and adapt to the varying conditions they were placed in. Hungary had been facing its own internal political issues at the time. Unpopular changes made by King Bela had made him increasingly unpopular amongst certain parts of the population, and reversals of some of the policies that had been made by the previous king also added to this. Ultimately, riots would arise, and events arising from the riots would impact the strength of King Bela's forces. The Mongols had seen the Hungarians as a threat due to their interactions with groups like the Cumans. Conflicts would eventually begin. Several groups would attack the Mongols, amongst them a force that was under Duke Frederick, and forces under other individuals like Ugrinksak, who was the Archbishop of Kalocha. These conflicts would be met with varying outcomes. Some ended in victory against the Mongols, whilst others ended with the opposing armies that had met them receiving several casualties. The Mongols would retreat when King Bela eventually decided to attack. Ultimately, the Hungarian forces would give chase to the Mongol forces. At some point in time, the opposing forces would be warned of an impending attack by the Mongols. They would send forces to intercept Mongol forces at a bridge, which would catch the Mongol forces by surprise. Several casualties on the Mongol side would result. Some of the troops involved in the march to meet the Mongols at night would be under Kalaman, who was the king's brother, and was the Duke of Slavonia. With the defeat, the Mongols would continue. Hungarians would have been left on the bridge, and these would be attacked by the Mongols. The Hungarians fled. Those at camp would be warned of the Mongols, and Kalaman would move with forces to meet the Mongols, but they would be overwhelmed by the great numbers. It wasn't just a small Mongol force making its way, but one a lot larger. Kalaman would hope that those in camp would be ready for the approaching Mongols, but they weren't, and battle would ensue. Initially it went poorly for the Mongols, whose position would hinder them. Many casualties on the Mongol side would be endured. Subutai and the forces under him had been building a bridge to cross, and they would eventually arrive. The Hungarians would retreat to camp, and some Mongols would consider retreat. The Mongol attacks would, however, continue. The Hungarians contained within the camp would panic. Attacks by the Hungarians were attempted but met little overall success. Eventually, the Hungarians would try to flee, but they would do so through the route desired for their retreat by the Mongols. Many casualties occurred on the Hungarian side. The result a victory for the Mongols. Several events would occur after this, including attacks on other locations. King Bela had escaped from the battlefield and would be pursued by the Mongols. Back to the story of Ogedei. Under him as well, we'd see a change in the regional structure of the Mongol Empire as Karakorum became the empire's capital. Campaigns in China, and against the Jin in particularly as well as against the Goryeo dynasty would bear fruit in some ways and lead to frustration in others. He'd eventually die in 1241. Torigene, widow of Ogedei, would be regent for a while, and under her some important conflicts for power would emerge. Guyuk would be the next Khan following Torigene's regency, and his reign would be marred in its own way by a conflict with relatives. Mongke would be the Khan from 1251 to 1259. He would oversee several important events, and phases included in them was conflicts with the southern Song dynasty. He'd be in charge when conflicts with the Abbasid Caliphate occurred, and saw the campaigns against the Vietnam which were generally unsuccessful during his tenure in power. Though there would be other attempts after him, as there were in 1285 and in 1287. Under Mongke, the Mongols would be involved in conflicts with the southern Song dynasty, and in the west. He would oversee several conflicts, amongst them were the siege of Baghdad in 1258, and campaigns in China. In the siege of Baghdad, Mongols would arrive in a city that was the center of great innovation, wonders and development. A home for great individuals of all types, from scientists to scholars and artists of all types. It would retain this position for decades. But it would also see several occupations, including those by the Buyids. Despite that, the population within it would swell. It would be founded in the 8th century, in a position that was favorable for many reasons and that served the dynasty that had started it, which was the Abbasids. Muhammad II of the Khwarezmian Empire would make an attempt at invasion, but it wouldn't be successful. In the period following the death of Prince Jalal al-Din, the Mongols would be active in northwestern Iran and in the Transcaucasus. Several cities would be captured as well during the period, which also saw the conflict between the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum and the Mongols, which would see the Mongols emerge victorious and with the state becoming a client state of the Mongols. The conflict would also see the Battle of Kasey Dag. Mongke would have the assassins on his map, and he would eventually send Hulegu, who along the way would pass several regions like Transoxiana. He'd travel in the company of several troops, some Mongol princes and military engineers amongst several other people. Several Ismaili fortresses would fall to the general Kibka. Rukn al-Din Kasho would be successor to Ala al-Din Muhammad III after the latter's death, and he would be faced with the threat of the Mongols. The Mongols would move on to the Abbasids, who were facing their own internal troubles at the time. Several exchanges would occur between Hulegu and the Abbasid Caliph, and after several offenses and dismissals, Hulegu would consider the possibility of attacking Baghdad, a decision he would seek advice about. The eventual attack would occur across several fronts, and would see the construction of several structures in preparation. Messages were sent to those inside the walls. Several individuals would be wounded. The Caliph at some point in time would try to negotiate with the Mongols, but they would be determined in their course, eventually leading to the surrender of the Caliph. Thus ends this episode into the Mongol Empire after Genghis Khan, from Ogedei to Mongke. A period that would be characterized by several momentous conflicts, invasions, policy changes, and political intrigue. The Mongol Empire that was left by Genghis Khan was steadily expanding its borders, reaching into lands that it had not known before, encountering various peoples and leading to several monumental and impactful changes. The world would not be the same. Things had started to change and would continue to change. In the next video we will look at events following the death of Mongke, from politics, to conflicts, divisions and expanding borders. Thank you for listening and watching this episode. If you enjoyed it, please take the time to subscribe to the channel. Also take the time to watch the other videos on this channel. Thank you.